Hi, I'm Grace Pedota with the CSE, and we're here for another episode of #Finance. I'm here today with Ross O'Brien. Ross is the founder and CEO of Bonaventure Equity, BVE, a late-stage cannabis venture capital fund, and runs the Cannabis Deal Makers Summit, CDS. Ross, thank you so much for joining me today. And I guess the reason or how we got connected was through Anna Sarin. Anna Sarin is, for our listeners that don't know, she is our Director of Listings Development in the Vancouver office in British Columbia, Canada. So how did Anna kind of get involved with the Cannabis Deal Maker Summit?
Sure. Well, Grace, thank you very much for having me. Really appreciate it. I also happen to be from Canada originally, so aside from that, I think you got the whole background and everything together. So delighted to speak with you today. We got connected with Anna and her team at one of the other industry conferences. Someone on my team was at one of these finance-focused event series. We primarily invest in private companies, or only invest in private companies, but are always trying to get a good bead on what's happening in the public markets. Obviously, the Canadian public markets is, really the key marketplace for cannabis businesses today. So it made sense to connect, and we stand up those event series, as you were talking about, the Cannabis Dealmakers events, really to give access to the best and brightest to our network of relationships that are all, large family offices and private investors that are all looking to either deploy meaningful capital or already are. And so some insights on what's happening north of the border, rather, and in the capital market space was really important.
That sounds exciting. Yeah, it was definitely the first time the CSE has been in Houston, Texas. So that was really cool for us to be at your conference. Now, a question that I have for you is, what makes I'm seeing a lot of these conferences like ArcView, MJBiz, that kind of bring family offices and other, angel investor types to cannabis deals. What makes Cannabis Dealmakers Summit different than other conferences such as ArcView, MJBiz?
Yeah, it's a great question, and we're really close with all of them and attend their events and cross-promote. What happened for us is we came from a background of working with family offices before we became cannabis-centric, and already had a pretty extensive network of relationships that are quite difficult to get access to, and had always had a mandate that we were bringing really great information, investment themes, access to really, important people in respective sectors, and it just seemed a natural fit to do that in cannabis. We looked around when we launched our fund and said, where are the finance-centric events that we otherwise should be going to, and didn't really see a lot of them that we were used to seeing in other industries. So the way to think about it is that our investment fund is the largest sponsor of the Cannabis Deal Maker Summit. So we still write the biggest checks, to host the events. And we otherwise wanted to really focus on providing content and engagement for, the other investors, the investment banks, the attorneys, the policymakers, leading CEOs, accountants, that more transactional swim lane. We have a mandate to create $1 billion in value and positively impact 1 billion lives. And we do that through three things. We invest, we engage, and we inform. We invest through Bonaventure, our fund. We engage through the event series that we host, CDS, and we inform, and that's part of the platform is the book that I've just finished writing that you've mentioned, Cannabis Capital.
Yeah, so let's talk about a little bit more about that book and kind of what it's about, and just kind of give us a deep dive into that book.
I would love to. So it's one of these sort of passion projects, I guess. It's something I've sort of wanted to do for some time. I've started as an entrepreneur. I helped open a restaurant when I was 19 at home in Calgary, Alberta. I've always been sort of afflicted with the entrepreneurship condition, if you will. It's certainly not as romantic as most people like to talk about it in the media and things. But over my career, I've always been very entrepreneurial. And when we started investing in cannabis businesses and looking at the entrepreneurs, I started looking at the space years ago. It's something that's been very interesting to us. We just, we didn't quite see the maturation in the management teams yet that were used to seeing at earlier stages in other sectors. And as we started to
talk, why do you think that is? That the maturation?
Well, I think it was. There's a lot of incorrect stigmatisms around what it means to be involved in cannabis. A lot of the capital providers and a lot of the more experienced entrepreneurs. I think we're sitting on the sidelines because for some time it still felt a little, like the Wild West. But, we've clearly proven and shown that there's a lot of sophistication and a lot of talent in, cannabis today. And that's why we, stood up our fund. But also, as we were vetting companies and maybe the management teams, we really felt that there was some fidelity in the conversation between the investors and the entrepreneurs, and just wanted to put out a resource out there that's really for the entrepreneurs to help them understand, how to, what entrepreneurship means in the context of cannabis, how, to go about raising capital, how investors operate, why they look for the certain types of things they look for, how to understand more technical aspects like valuation and financial modeling. But really stood back and said, if we want to help bridge this communication, this conversation that needs to happen between entrepreneurs and investors, we stepped back and said, look, cannabis actually isn't an industry. We call it the cannabis economy. And that's the first part of the book, is really defining that there is just a global wave of access to cannabis that's defining sectors and industries within it. But I would challenge anyone to identify an existing industry that otherwise isn't already going to be impacted by cannabis. We believe that there will be cannabis-based products in every home, period.
Interesting. And so what sector do you think will be the most impacted by cannabis?
Well, our sector, venture capital, has been impacted materially. Cannabis venture capital is being defined as its own vertical. A lot of the, existing venture capital firms that are traditionally trying to finance disruption and innovation in mature markets are otherwise not coming into these earlier stage cannabis companies. And a lot of them are just not prepared to or not able to, even from a governance standpoint. So there's a small group of funds like ourselves that are now establishing cannabis venture capital. And we actually look at it a little bit differently, that we're in a phase where we're still just putting all the infrastructure in place, and the great entrepreneurs and the great businesses that we can get comfortable with don't necessarily have to be going out and creating some new disruptive, wild idea that you see in more traditional ventures. So that's definitely one area. But everything's getting impacted, from, consumer products to certainly banking. And we spent a lot of time in the healthcare region, everything from nutraceuticals and over the counter all the way to some really deep, scientific developments, facility bricks and mortar. There's a lot of healthcare bricks and mortar, from testing labs to scientific labs to, distribution models. And we're really, really compelled to look very closely at a lot of the, the health benefits or the underlying symptoms that can be addressed through cannabis. And that's very broad.
So that's really great. I used to work in venture capital, and it was a fund that invested in early stage healthcare technology companies. So they weren't really looking into the cannabis space, but that's a really interesting sector, and it has been proven to have a lot of health benefits. So, what's the coolest kind of technology that you've seen, or the cannabis company that is dealing to kind of combat health concerns right now, that's a cannabis-based company that you've seen so far?
Well, there's too many to name. There's a lot of great, innovations that are out there, but we like, I don't think anybody in the scientific community is debating anymore whether cannabis can be a miracle, lifestyle treatment for Parkinson's, whether there's real applications for an alternative to opioids, PTSD, depression, cancer and oncology treatments, and just general, welfare and being. It's broad, it's exciting. And as I'm sure that you saw as an investor in your venture fund in healthcare, the thing that we find really a little bit different about it that was compelling is that a lot of the early stage companies that would be, a new device or something, or some new technology that's being developed in more traditional healthcare, it's years before you can get to profitability. Yeah. And a lot of these companies are actually at a very early stage hitting some interesting milestones that changes the sort of risk profile that we get comfortable with. So it just was a no-brainer for us to really focus on that.
Wow, that's really interesting. I actually saw on Leafly the other day like a whole wheel of all of the cannabinoids that help different disorders, and it's really interesting. I did not know that cannabis or certain cannabinoids in cannabis can help treat Parkinson's. So, but what I find really interesting is although there are studies, I still feel that there are people that don't believe yet, the consumers. And I'm just wondering if you're seeing that too, or some sort of hesitation on consumers as to if it actually does work to cure.
Well, sure. And so this is a more systemic issue, is there's just a lot of misinformation or lack of education, just a lack of understanding. We're also seeing just more broadly, there's very little customer affinity to specific brands yet, or specific types of consumption methodologies. The flower is the flower is the flower. There's different, strengths and delivery mechanisms, but it's not as differentiated as you would get in other sort of, like intoxication products like alcohol, et cetera. But we're getting there. So the consumer affinity to certain brands is not there. In terms of the healthcare benefits, to get back to your question, I think that we're finally at a point where we're just at the tip of what's happening in terms of the research and the studies. And I don't think anybody is even debating whether or not something that just grows naturally, that could potentially have applications, isn't worth otherwise, investing in whether it's research or time or effort. But I think a lot of it is still just, generational gaps, or I took my 74-year-old mother to her first dispensary in British Columbia this summer when I was home visiting them. And, she wouldn't go without me, but her trainer at her gym was saying, look, they're a whole group of people that use it for, joint relief and things like this. And she really wanted to try it, but was still just a little bit nervous. And it took me going with her to go in and, find some products that she was comfortable with. So it's just, I think, going to take time to be a little more mainstream. But look, here in the States, we know Walgreens and CVS, Kroger's, these are big brands that are otherwise endorsing or sell, over-the-counter pharmaceuticals and prescription. And they're all looking at what they should be putting that's starting with CBD on their shelves. So it's coming.
Right. Yeah. So I guess the trust will lie more on the bigger brands than adopting cannabis, and then people will have more trust in it with that.
It's into some of these communities. So I know someone who's really involved with autism. And when you get into these specific communities, I mean, they're talking about it as patients, users, parents all the time, right? So she probably has more knowledge about what's available and how and why and how it should be used and dosages and things. But it takes that, focus to go explore, because really and I think this is a systemic issue with pharmacology, right? Is that a lot of these treatments that we use are not as beneficial as we think. And when they become standard protocols, it's difficult to unseat them, even though I think we all intrinsically know that it's probably better to be, using something that's natural and less harmful to your physiology than some of the, concocted medicines that are approved, treatments.
Exactly. It's definitely a really big topic of conversation. I mean, I was in the for pet health. Like I'm seeing a lot of things with CBD and pet health. And sure. I was at a dog park over the weekend, and I bumped into this guy who had this really, really nice dog, but it was really nervous. It had come from an abused family, and he adopted it. And so I just turned to him and said, you can use CBD to help calm your dog down. Like a lot of people, there's a lot of research and studies on it to show that it's beneficial. And he just looked at me like, what are you, nuts? Like, I don't want to use that on my dog. No, my precious dog. And it was just kind of, it's gonna need more information, a little bit more awareness to get out there. But I really do see the benefits, just such as yourself, in getting, like, it's gonna take PetSmart to, make dog food.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm looking at it for my pet as well, my dog as well. It's what I think happens is, and this is essentially how cannabis started to be, decriminalized or going past prohibition, is that it was grassroots, no pun intended, right? Yeah. People were literally going up in their local community and having conversations and getting active and saying, we want these types of measures to be put forward as law, and the regulations gain momentum. And so now everybody's saying, okay, we're there and covering it. And so it's your dog park community that's having conversations about something that really works. And when you hear anecdotally from someone else that it works, you're more inclined to go try it, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
I would think.
Yeah.
So the momentum's there and the wave is there for sure.
Yeah. Every person at a dog park at a time. So I just kind of want, before we kind of end the conversation here, I took a look at the Entrepreneur Press, which is a media outlet that you created. Yeah. Very cool. Do you want to just talk a little bit more about the Entrepreneur Press and how you made it, and what kinds of media that we can see on, or content on that website?
So Entrepreneur Press is actually owned by Entrepreneur Magazine.
Okay.
So Entrepreneur Media, they have the magazine, they have Green Entrepreneur, which is their second, magazine that's entirely focused on cannabis. They're my publisher, the right platform for this book, right? Because it's all about entrepreneurship and raising capital. And so for them and us, it's been a great fit, because as my publisher, they've just been amazing to work with. I'm actually as a result of that and their focus on cannabis, I'm actually going to LA next week, and I'm going to be a judge on the next season of their show called Elevator Pitch, which is their version of Shark Tank or Dragon's Den. And so they've really got a key focus. So there's going to be a lot of sort of media and promotion around it. These are all fun things to do. I love trying to get the message out to entrepreneurs, and for us and for this project, it seemed like the perfect channel segments, and they've just been great to work with. And I would encourage everyone to check out Green Entrepreneur, their podcasts as well. The magazine's fabulous. Our fund was recognized as one of the top 20 companies to watch out of their top 100 list this year. So they're really embracing entrepreneurship in Canada. It's really it's everywhere. There are more companies and entrepreneurs focusing on this than anything else, I think, market-wise. And there's just a tidal wave of entrepreneurship that's related to cannabis now that it's so much more accessible.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for speaking with me today. It was actually really lovely to chat with you. I'm happy that Anna could connect us. And I'm looking forward to our future participation in your at Cannabis Deal Maker Summit. And before I go, I just want to ask, how can our viewers get a copy of your book, and where can we find you on the web?
Well, thank you very much. BV Equity, B as in boy, V as in Victor, equity.com is in Bonaventure Equity is our fund website. CannabisDealmakers.com is where all the event series and additional content will be made available. And the book is already up for pre-sale on and Barnes & Nobles, and I would imagine Chapters maybe at this point as well. So just search Cannabis Capital on Amazon, and it's there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me today.
It was a pleasure. Thanks.
Hi, it's Grace from the CSC, reminding you to make sure to follow us on social media for the latest updates on our listed companies, as well as new listing alerts. For more in-depth content, be sure to pick up our free quarterly magazine, Public Entrepreneur, available online at thecsc.com.